Did he eat it?
He just was trying to chew through it, I guess. Just sat there with the piece of my skin in his hand and was just sitting there chewing on it and just, kind of watching me sleep.
It's not what anyone was hoping for. We had hoped that they didn't want to be found for a period of time, but that wasn't the case.
I think that she was more a product of Pazuzu's brainwashing than anything.
And he said, "Mom, you just can't take it anymore."
His house became a place with zero rules. There was blood on the walls and human waste on the floor, and his own mother lived there the whole time, locked in her room. I struggle to wrap my head around how a mother could witness that and simply stay in her room. I am honestly curious if you think she was a victim too, or just as guilty as him. To people, but for years, no one did anything. And when you find out how many times the authorities were warned, you'll question everything. Pazuzu Algarad was born on August 12th, 1978, which makes him a Leo. Now, it's important to understand from the very beginning that Pazuzu Algarad is not the name he was given at birth. His real name was John Alexander Lawson. He legally changed it later in life to Pazuzu Algarad, a name that would become infamous. For the sake of clarity, I'm just going to call him Pazuzu, because otherwise the story could get quite confusing. He was born in California to his parents, Cynthia and Timothy Lawson, and he was their only child. When Pazuzu was just 2 years old, the entire family decided to relocate across the country to Winston-Salem in North Carolina. And just to be clear, this is not the famous Salem in Massachusetts known for its witch trials. When I first started looking into this case, that was my initial thought. But no, this is a different Salem entirely. It's a strange coincidence though, especially considering the dark path this story is about to take. For the first few years of his life, Pazuzu seemed to have a pretty normal childhood. Those who knew him back then described him as a happy and athletic child. However, when Pazuzu turned 8 years old, everything started to go terribly wrong. The catalyst for this downward spiral was his parents' divorce. After the separation, his father, Timothy, moved all the way back to California, and what's truly heartbreaking is that Pazuzu never saw his dad ever again. We don't know the exact reasons why his father just packed up and left his only son behind, but he did. And just like that, it was only Pazuzu and his mom, Cynthia. Almost immediately after the divorce, Cynthia remarried a man named Johnny James. This meant that Pazuzu now had a new stepfather, and it was a situation that was destined for conflict. Pazuzu absolutely hated his stepdad, which is completely understandable when you think about it. I don't have information on whether Johnny James was a bad person, but you have to see it from Pazuzu's perspective. His parents had just divorced, his biological father had vanished from his life, and now, suddenly, there was this new man, this stranger, trying to fill that role. It is a classic tragedy where the child feels replaced by the new partner. I wonder if you think this specific moment was the point of no return for him. For Pazuzu, it must have felt like his dad had been completely replaced, and he was not going to accept it. The tension in the house was constant. Pazuzu and his stepfather were always arguing, constantly at each other's throats. In response, Pazuzu began to isolate himself completely. When he would come home from school, he wouldn't speak to anyone. He would just go straight to his room and lock the door. Now Cynthia, instead of addressing the very clear and growing problem, chose a different path. She decided to ignore the conflict. She didn't want to acknowledge the fact that her son and her new husband could not get along. Instead, she started to spoil Pazuzu rotten. When it came to her son, the word no simply didn't exist. She would buy him whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. There were absolutely no rules, no boundaries. It's even been said that Pazuzu, the child, ruled the house with an iron fist. So, when Pazuzu was 13 years old, his mom and stepdad did make an attempt to get him professional help by taking him to counseling. But even at that young age, Pazuzu was incredibly skilled at manipulation. During his counseling sessions, he managed to convince the counselor that he wasn't the problem at all. He claimed that the real issue was his mom and stepdad, and unbelievably, the counselor believed him. All of this unresolved tension eventually led to the stepfather walking out on the family. So now, once again, it was just Pazuzu and Cynthia. After her second marriage failed, his mom spiraled into a deep depression. She started drinking excessively inside the house. She completely stopped taking care of Pazuzu, and she stopped taking care of herself. It was as if she had just checked out of life. It wasn't long before she started inviting random men, a lot of them, into their home. She would engage in intimate acts with these men, all while her young son was in the house. Now, I'm not certain if these acts happened directly in front of him, but honestly, given the circumstances, it wouldn't be surprising. What is certain is that she was having these encounters around her son, and he was fully aware of what was going on. Pazuzu, at this point, was far too young to be exposed to this kind of behavior. No child should have to witness that from a parent. It has been said that this period was deeply traumatizing for him. From this point forward, the problems in Pazuzu's teenage life just continued to pile up, one on top of the other. First, because his mom had stopped taking care of him in the household, Pazuzu's personal hygiene completely plummeted. He stopped showering, his clothes were never washed, he stopped using deodorant. And as you can imagine, someone who doesn't maintain their hygiene begins to develop a strong odor. As a result, Pazuzu faced relentless bullying at school. He was always dirty, and he always smelled bad. The other kids cruelly started calling him Turd Boy. Pazuzu did not take kindly to this. The constant bullying and name-calling led to him getting into a lot of physical fights. Pazuzu quickly became an outcast. He fell out with the few friends he had. He started dressing differently from everyone else, even shaving his head. He just wasn't a pleasant person to be around, and this resulted in him becoming incredibly isolated. It was during this time that Pazuzu started to develop severe anxiety. Because his anxiety went untreated, it just got worse and worse. It soon reached a point where he was terrified to even leave the house. He never wanted to go to school. His mom eventually took him to a psychiatrist. This is when Pazuzu was diagnosed as being psychotic. He was also diagnosed with schizophrenia and agoraphobia. Now, agoraphobia, in simple terms, is a fear of crowded places, of going outside the home, of facing situations that are out of one's control, and of entering locations where there isn't a clear exit. Pazuzu suffered from this intensely. He struggled to leave his own home, he struggled to go to school, he struggled with all of those situations. It was strongly recommended that he receive treatment for all of his diagnoses. However, treatment was very expensive, and Cynthia simply couldn't afford it for her son. So, all of his serious mental health conditions just went completely untreated. Eventually, Pazuzu did start going back to school, but his behavior became an absolute nightmare. He started vandalizing school property and acting out constantly. He was always in trouble. To cope with his deteriorating mental health and the chaotic situation at home, because you have to remember, Cynthia was not being a supportive parent. Pazuzu, at the tender age of 13, turned to drugs and alcohol. Now, you might be wondering, where on earth does a 13-year-old get drugs and alcohol? The answer is horrifying. He got them from his own mother. Cynthia would buy her son a pack of beer every single day. As a 13-year-old, Pazuzu would drink 12 cans of beer every single day. Buying alcohol for a 13-year-old goes beyond bad parenting. It is criminal. Does that sound like abuse to you? Or was she just trying to buy his love? It's almost unbelievable. So here he was, a very isolated, lonely 13-year-old boy who was, for all intents and purposes, an alcoholic. There was one more thing that Pazuzu turned to in order to cope with his world, his life, and his anxieties, and that was Satanism. He was also obsessed with magic. From a young age, Pazuzu had been obsessed with horror films. He loved movies like Freddy Krueger, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and The Exorcist. He would dress up as characters from these films all year round, not just on Halloween. He was often seen running around his neighborhood dressed as a vampire or a werewolf. As a 13-year-old, Pazuzu started to learn about black magic and witchcraft, and within a very short time, he genuinely began to believe that he possessed supernatural powers. He would tell his classmates that he could move objects with his mind, that he could control the weather, and that he could make terrible things happen to people he didn't like. Of course, his classmates only bullied him more for these claims. But for Pazuzu, this was all very serious. He started poring over books on magic, learning how to cast spells on people, how to control their minds and influence them to do what he wanted. This is when he started to dabble in his own unique brand of Satanism. And when I refer to Satanism in this case, I do mean the literal worship of Satan. I'm not talking about the Church of Satan, which is a very different organization. That is not what Pazuzu was into. He started reading about rituals and harming animals, and he actually began to perform these rituals himself. I don't know the exact details, but I do know that he ended the lives of a number of animals, like birds and rabbits, and would ingest some of their blood. We often hear that harming animals is the first red flag for a future killer. Tell me I am not the only one who sees this as the moment the authorities should have stepped in. It's just horrifying to even think about. It wasn't long until Pazuzu became the talk of the town. You see, the area where he grew up was an extremely religious Christian community. So, as you can imagine, someone claiming to be a Satanist, running around dressed as a vampire, and claiming to have dark magic powers, well, everyone was horrified. Pazuzu continued his downward spiral. His mental health was just getting worse and worse. And then, when he was 14 years old, he dropped out of school altogether. His agoraphobia had become so severe that he literally couldn't leave the house. It got so bad that Pazuzu just shut himself in his room, completely cut off from the world. Over the next few years, he really withdrew into himself. He spent long stretches of time in the house completely alone. And when he was alone, he was drinking heavily, taking drugs, including hard drugs. He was also on certain medications for his mental health, such as Zoloft. The combination of medication, drugs, and alcohol was a recipe for disaster. The only person he had any contact with during this time was his mom. It wasn't until Pazuzu was 18 years old that he started to come out of his shell again. When you realize that he had been isolated from the world for 4 years, that is a very long time. When he turned 18, he did start to receive disability benefits for his agoraphobia. However, he wanted more money than what he was getting, so he decided to start dealing drugs. Because he was dealing, this forced him to leave his home and interact with clients. It wasn't long until Pazuzu realized that his clients were all very similar to him. The people he was interacting with were outcasts, people forgotten by society, individuals who struggled with their own mental health. Pazuzu realized that he actually got along with his clients, which gave him a newfound sense of confidence. For the first time, Pazuzu felt like he had found his people. However, he would definitely use his confidence in the wrong way, but we'll get to that. So, Pazuzu was now meeting all of these new people. He felt more confident, and he wanted to create a completely new identity for himself. He wanted to get rid of the old person he was. This is when he changed his name from John Alexander Lawson to Pazuzu Algarad, and he did legally change his name to Pazuzu when he was in his 20s. Now, if you've never heard the name Pazuzu before, you are not alone. I had never heard of it either. But apparently, Pazuzu is a character from The Exorcist. Pazuzu is the demon that possesses the 12-year-old girl in the book and the movie. I'm not entirely sure if Pazuzu is the name of an actual demon in mythology. I'm not very clued up on that kind of thing. But yes, Pazuzu was his new name. And he definitely changed his name to Pazuzu Algarad for shock value. He basically went about creating this terrifying character for himself. He wanted to be the scariest version of himself possible. He wanted to scare other people, and he really got a thrill out of frightening everyone in his very religious Christian town. People truly did become terrified of him, and the more he did, the more scared people became, and he decided to run with this persona. Pazuzu thrived on offending people. He wanted to be controversial. He wanted people to be scared of him and to dislike him. So, Pazuzu started to get a bunch of tattoos that he knew would offend the people in his town. For example, he got Satan tattooed on his forearm. He also got 666 tattooed on him, and Lucifer as well. He had various other offensive symbols tattooed all over his body. Again, he stopped taking care of his personal hygiene. He didn't shower. He didn't brush his teeth. I read that he only took a bath once a year. Let that sink in for a moment. Apparently, the reason he didn't shower was because he believed that cleaning yourself would strip the body of its natural defenses to illness and infections. Pazuzu also filed down his teeth into sharp points, essentially creating fangs, because he wanted to emulate the vampires he was so obsessed with. When I read that, I just thought, can you imagine the pain of filing down your own teeth into fangs? The nerve endings must have been excruciating. I assume he was high on meth when he did it, so he probably didn't feel the pain at the time, but I'm sure he felt it afterwards. He filed his teeth into fangs so it would be easier to bite into animals and ingest their blood, and also, probably, to bite into people. He also split his tongue down the middle so that it resembled a snake's tongue, which is just another level of body modification that is hard to even think about. He also started to make up various stories about his background to seem more scary and more like a villainous, mythical character. He would tell people that his mom was a Satanist and that his dad was some sort of high priest from Iraq. Pazuzu also told people that he had started following the teachings of Islam. Again, he did this purely to scare people, because this was just after the 9/11 attacks and there was a lot of Islamophobia in the country. He wanted to use that fear. So he told everyone that he was Muslim, which, of course, he wasn't. He also started to model his behavior on people like Charles Manson. He admired how famous cult leaders were able to control people. And in true cult leader style, Pazuzu made up his own religion, which is just baffling, isn't it? He's telling people he's a Satanist, that he's a Muslim, but now he's also creating his own religion. His new religion was based on the ancient Sumerian religion, and it involved him performing monthly dark moon sacrifices, which would take the form of him harming an animal and ingesting its blood. So, basically, Pazuzu was someone who just wanted to be controversial. He wanted to offend people, and he would do everything in his power to stand out. Pazuzu had created this whole new character for himself, and he was showing it off to all of his new friends, and they all thought it was amazing. But what happened next? Well, Pazuzu decided to turn his home into a huge party spot. He invited pretty much everyone he knew to hang out at his house. It became known as the Knob Hill House, not just because Pazuzu was a giant knob, but because the house was located at 2749 Knob Hill Drive. And this house would, unfortunately, turn into a house of horrors. I also want to point out that Pazuzu was still living with his mom. This was not his house. This was his mom Cynthia's house. So, Pazuzu was currently in his late 20s, and his mom, just like when he was younger, let him do whatever he wanted. She allowed him to turn her entire house into a party house, and she just didn't seem to care. She gave him a free pass on everything, and Pazuzu completely took over the home. This house turned into the craziest, most disturbing place I think I've ever come across. The things that went on in this house are just unbelievable. And I just want you all to remember that while everything I'm about to describe was happening, Pazuzu's mom, Cynthia, was living there. Pazuzu would invite everyone he knew to this home. So there would constantly be 20 to 30 people in the house at any given time. They would hang out, they would drink, they would do drugs. There were a lot of psychedelic drugs being taken. Pazuzu wanted to create an environment where people felt free, where they felt like they were not judged, and where they could dress how they wanted, say what they wanted, and do whatever they wanted. You know, on the surface, that doesn't necessarily sound like a bad place. However, he also wanted people to be able to act out their deepest, darkest fetishes and fantasies. If they wanted to do something illegal, they could go ahead, no problem. If they wanted to trash the house, they could. If they wanted to smash a television, they could. If they wanted to smash a beer bottle over someone's head, they could. If they wanted to have intimate relations with someone in front of everyone, they could. There were 0 rules in this home, but that's not the worst of it. Oh, no. People also decided that it was acceptable to use the bathroom in front of everyone, in the corner of the room. And I wish I was joking. People would literally relieve themselves on the carpet in front of other people. They would urinate on the carpet, but they would also go into the corner, squat, and leave human waste. I cannot fathom walking into a house that smells of death and deciding to stay for a party. I wonder what kind of void these people were trying to fill to accept such squalor. Why? Why would anyone want to do that? But the worst part is that no one would clean it up. I know, just imagine the smell. But anything was permissible at Pazuzu's house. And I really have to question the kind of person who would want to do that in the corner of a room in front of people. As you can imagine, a house with no rules, where you could do anything you wanted, soon started to attract hundreds of people. And as time went on, and the more people that started to show up, things just kept getting more and more out of hand. Obviously, when new people arrived at this house, they didn't know Pazuzu. So he would give them a welcoming, he would introduce himself, say that he was a Satanist, that he had powers, and he would start to perform rituals with animals for the new people who would arrive. He would then use his fangs and ingest the blood of these animals in front of people. Now, I don't know about any of you, but if someone did that in front of me, I would be leaving immediately. But people were fascinated by this. People would see him literally bite into an animal and ingest its blood, and they would cheer him on. I'm not sure if the animals were alive or not at the time when he would do this. I just don't know. But it's just awful to contemplate. Pazuzu even started to bite into his own arm to ingest his own blood, as well as asking if he could bite into other people's arms and ingest their blood, which people gladly let him do. And all of a sudden, there would be these crazy orgies happening where everyone would be engaging in intimate acts. People would be biting each other, ingesting each other's blood. It's just beyond comprehension. And I just want to remind you all that Pazuzu doesn't shower. Let that sit with you for a moment. The house just started to completely deteriorate because no one was taking care of it. No one was cleaning, no one was tidying up, there was no maintenance being done, and people were literally trashing the place. There was blood smeared on the walls, everything was damp and moldy, there was human waste in the corners, people would just urinate all over the carpet as well. So you have all of that and the smell of that. There were also 5 dogs living in the house, and they would defecate and urinate on the carpet, just anywhere. There were rodents, maggots, and flies. Why would anyone want to go into this house? I do not know. There were also deceased animals in the house that no one ever thought to clean up. I assume that these were, unfortunately, from the rituals. There were deceased animals outside of the home as well, in the front yard and the backyard. There was apparently even a deceased cat hung up in a tree outside of the house. There was graffiti all over the house. There were signs on the outside that said, "No trespassing" and "No gang members allowed." It's just really weird, isn't it? No trespassing and no gang members allowed, but you can leave human waste in a corner. That's okay. Satanic imagery was also all over the house. Pentagrams were spray painted on the walls inside. There were also inverted crosses. There were images of Satan, the devil. The words "evil will triumph" were painted on the front door. There was trash everywhere, all inside the house, all outside the house. Black metal music was being blasted at full volume 24 hours a day. The neighbors started to become affected by the smell of the house. They would have to keep their windows closed because the smell was that bad. And you're probably wondering, well, why didn't they report them? It was because they were all scared of Pazuzu. They all genuinely thought that he had powers and that he would curse them. Plus, he was a pretty scary person anyway. He was very volatile. Who knows what he was capable of? No one actually wanted to turn him in. And remember, Pazuzu's mom is there the whole time. Yes, she is there. Throughout the sex parties, the blood drinking, the animal rituals, Cynthia didn't care. She just said that as long as Pazuzu and all of his friends didn't go into her room, she didn't care. So Cynthia basically just locked herself in her room and never really ventured out into the rest of the house. It's ironic, really, isn't it? Because it's kind of like the roles have reversed. When Pazuzu was a young child, Cynthia would have her own parties and have men over, and Pazuzu would be the one locked in his room all the time. Well, now that's kind of what Cynthia was experiencing. Pazuzu was now the one having the wild parties, and Cynthia was the one locked in her room. And I do place some of the blame here on Cynthia, because at the end of the day, she is his mother, and she is living in this house. And obviously, we haven't gotten to the main events of today's case yet. But if Cynthia had just done something to control her son, none of this might have happened. Why was she letting him do whatever he wanted? As time passed, people from all over the country were traveling to this crazy party house. People would praise Pazuzu for allowing them to do whatever they wanted. I think the people he was attracting were outcasts, people who were ignored by society, who were forgotten. So I think all of these people, wherever they were traveling from, finally felt like they belonged somewhere. And they praised Pazuzu for giving them that sense of belonging, for giving them that community that they had never had before. But Pazuzu loved all of this attention, and he used it to his advantage. He saw that people looked up to him. People really did bow down at his feet. It's truly like a cult leader. Growing up, Pazuzu was always the outcast himself. He never had many friends. He was very lonely, very isolated, and now he had all of these people worshiping him, and he loved it. He loved putting on a show. And because he had all of this power over the people in his home, he started to manipulate and control them, to see how far he could push them, to see how much they truly worshipped him. He was very charming when he wanted to be. When Pazuzu wanted to ingest anybody's blood, they would let him. If he wanted anyone to commit a crime for him, they would also happily do it. It's just crazy how much power he seemed to have over people. And it wasn't just male followers that Pazuzu had. Oh, no. He attracted a lot of women as well. And this is just so bizarre, but a lot of the women that he came into contact with, they literally fell for him. They fell in love with him. Around this time, Pazuzu was entering his 30s, and a lot of the women he was attracting were in their late teenage years. They were 18, 19, maybe in their early 20s. So they were a lot younger than him, a lot more vulnerable, a lot more naive, and easy to control and manipulate. Pazuzu would manipulate their young, impressionable minds, and he would encourage nudity. He would have intimate relations with all of these young women, literally at the same time. He would be with one, then another, then another. And I just want to remind you all again that he doesn't shower. His favorite thing was to orchestrate huge orgies with as many people as he possibly could. Everyone in that house was involved. And why anyone would want to be intimate in a house where there are rodents running around and maggots and everything's moldy and there's human waste in the corner, I do not know. And then next, in true, typical cult leader fashion, he decided to make a lot of the women that followed him into his wives or fiancées. What is it with cult leaders? Why do they want multiple wives? Pazuzu didn't legally marry any of these women. He would just refer to them all as his spiritual wives or fiancées. I don't actually know how many he had. I couldn't find an exact number. However, I do know that he had two main ones, and these two spiritual wives are actually very significant for the rest of today's case. First was a woman called Amber Birch. She was born on January 2nd, 1990, making her a Capricorn. It has been described that she had a very happy childhood. She did well at school. She absolutely adored horses, which her family owned. She would quite often have her friends over, and they would go riding. In 2008, she graduated from high school. She was 18 years old, and this is when she first met Pazuzu Algarad. She was 18 and he was 30. She entered into a relationship with him, and this is where everything went downhill for Amber. Her friends and family have said that she completely changed overnight. She just wasn't the same person. She also stopped taking care of herself. She stopped showering. She started taking drugs for the very first time and drinking excessively. She also filed her teeth into fangs, just like Pazuzu. She even stated on Facebook that she was legally married to him, which of course she wasn't. She basically just cut off all of her friends and family, her old life completely gone. She was 100% dedicated to and worshipped Pazuzu. It is terrifying how quickly a normal life can be dismantled by one toxic influence. Does this make sense to you that they were brainwashed, or were they looking for this darkness all along? The second of Pazuzu's wives that we know about was a woman called Crystal Matlock. We actually don't know too much about Crystal. We know that she was born in 1987, so she was approximately 21 years old when she first met Pazuzu. And again, it was probably a very similar situation as Amber. We know that Crystal was completely taken in by Pazuzu as well. She completely fell for his charm. She thought that he was a hero, a savior. She worshipped him. And obviously, Crystal and Amber were the wives. He probably had other fiancées as well. It's just all so messed up. It literally is just like a mini cult going on in this house. As time passes, Pazuzu continues on, throwing these crazy parties. We are now in 2009. This is when Facebook was becoming more widely known and used by most people. Word quickly spread on social media about these crazy parties, which then generated even more people arriving at the home. But when we get to 2009, this is when things take a much darker turn. I mean, they're already pretty dark anyway. We have criminal activity going on, drug taking, assaults, animal rituals, and torture. Pazuzu is completely terrorizing the neighborhood. But now it gets worse, because Pazuzu now starts to demonstrate a more violent side. It's almost like something changed in him. Was it that the power got to his head? Was it the fact that with Facebook and social media, the word spread about him, so he started to become more well-known in the area? Was it just purely the fact that so many years had passed and he was just able to get away with whatever he wanted? I don't know. But something changed in 2009. So now, when people would come to the house, Pazuzu would make sure that he showed them his weapons collection, which was a bunch of knives and a bunch of guns. He actually had guns stashed in the dishwasher, of all places. It was in 2009 where Pazuzu started to brag about the fact that he had taken people's lives. Now, when he told people this, they just kind of laughed it off. They thought, oh, he likes to do things for shock value. He's always going over the top, making things up, It's just Pazuzu. But he would tell stories about how he had ended the lives of multiple homeless people just for fun, and also that he had taken the lives of 2 sex workers before consuming parts of their remains, then burning their bodies and burying them in his backyard. But people didn't believe him. He was always saying things like this. He would also threaten guests with his weapons. He would order them around at knife point. He would tell guests that he was holding people captive in the basement. When people would arrive at the house, they would comment on the smell, because, my God, can you imagine the smell? People have actually said that the house smelled like death. So when people would arrive and say, "Whoa, it smells like death in here," Pazuzu would just say it's because of the bodies in the basement. He would also tell guests that if they didn't comply with what he wanted, they would also end up in the basement, either captive or worse. Now, you would think with the smell of the house alone, but also all of this talk about violence and all of the threats to the guests, and the fact that he was talking about ending multiple people's lives, you would think that that would put people off from going. But no, it was almost like it became more of an attraction. And I think, if I'm being completely honest, people just turned a blind eye to what he was doing because they wanted drugs. A lot of the people at this house were addicts, and I don't really think they cared about what Pazuzu had done. I don't think they were necessarily scared of him either. They just wanted drugs, and they just wanted an environment where they could take drugs freely. So, some people didn't take him seriously because he liked to do things for shock value. But then the people that did take him seriously didn't really seem to care enough. In 2009, 2 guests would visit Pazuzu's house for the first time, 2 men called Joshua Wetzler and Tommy Welch. And these 2 men are very, very significant to today's case. Josh Wetzler, at the time, was 32 years old. He was born in Mocksville, North Carolina, and after high school, he met his girlfriend, Stacy Carter, at a music festival. The 2 of them hit it off immediately. They entered into a very serious relationship, and they both shared a love of horses. In 2002, the couple actually bought a property and some land to have a load of horses and to kind of have a rehabilitation center for them. It wasn't long until the couple went on to have a son together, a little boy called Jared. However, as the construction on the property progressed, the couple found themselves in financial difficulties. So to try and make a little bit more money, Josh started a horse hoof trimming business. And things were kind of looking up. At least they were turning a corner. But then one day, Josh ordered some psychedelic mushrooms in the post, and he got caught. Because the mushrooms had crossed state lines, this was a felony charge. And after this, his life just completely fell apart. Because he had a felony charge, he could no longer get clients. No one wanted to work with him. He also couldn't get a job. Stacy soon left him. She took their son with her and got full custody. Josh was only allowed to see his son under restricted visitation. Pretty much everything in Josh's life had gone wrong. From one stupid mistake, his whole life just completely fell apart. He became an outcast from society. He struggled financially. He was forced into selling drugs just to make some money to survive. And he was getting involved with not the nicest people. And this is when he first got introduced to Pazuzu Algarad. The second man was Tommy Welch. He was in his 30s at the time this case was taking place. He was the eldest of 3 boys, and he grew up in Arkansas. He was really good with cars. That was his passion. He loved taking cars apart and putting them back together. He was really close with his brothers. He was an uncle to 2 young children who he absolutely adored. He also lived a pretty clean life. He was never into drugs. He was just a family man, dedicated to his family, and he absolutely loved them. However, in 2009, In the meantime, months go by, and no one comes knocking at Pazuzu's door to investigate the disappearance of Tommy and Josh. During this time, Pazuzu got in trouble with the law in various other ways. He was convicted of larceny, but only received probation. He was also charged with assaulting a woman. Again, he was only given probation. On top of this, Pazuzu also assaulted his own mother. I feel like I need to stress this again, but Cynthia, his mom, is living in the house when all of this is going on. So one time, surely there is no way that Josh is gone. However, even though she didn't believe these rumors, Stacy still went to the police, and it turns out that the police had also heard these rumors. Yes, the police had heard the rumors that Pazuzu Algarad was responsible for the disappearance of Josh, but not just that. The police had also heard rumors that Pazuzu could be involved with the disappearance of another man called Tommy Welch, and it's just like, okay, so you've heard these rumors, why are you not doing anything? So the police, in the end, decide to go out and search Pazuzu's property for Josh and also Tommy. On the 23rd of February, 2010, the police show up to Pazuzu's home with a search warrant. They made their way to his backyard, but there was one problem. They didn't have the proper equipment to carry out the search, apparently, and I really want to stress that apparently they couldn't get their hands on it on that day. They didn't have the proper ground-penetrating radar or scanners to see if there was something buried there. They just didn't have the proper equipment to actually check. And I just keep thinking, well, if you didn't have the proper equipment, come back another day. It really is that simple. I mean, it might not be that simple. They may have to do some more paperwork. God forbid people actually do their job. But it's like, come back when you have the proper equipment. But they didn't. All they did, the police that were there, they went to the backyard and they started just kicking up a bit of the grass with their feet, lifting up some of the dirt. They did have sniffer dogs with them, and they just made the dogs sniff the ground that they had kicked up. But guess what? Because of all of the overwhelming scent from Pazuzu's home, the sniffer dogs couldn't pick up anything because everything literally smelled like death. So the police were like, well, the dogs haven't picked up anything, so there's clearly no bodies in the ground. Let's leave. They concluded that Pazuzu had nothing to do with the disappearance of Josh or Tommy. Leaving a potential crime scene because you lack the right equipment seems like a baffling excuse for professionals. Does that sound suspicious to you too? Or is it just gross incompetence? Wow. So a few more months go by, and Pazuzu is still living the same crazy life with his whole sex cult and parties in his home. He's bragging about the fact that he has gotten away with more terrible acts. And I guarantee you, he probably really did think that he had gotten away with it, because the police had literally turned up at his house, searched the backyard, and cleared him. But then in June of 2010, another body turns up. On the 7th of June, 2010, the body of Joseph Chandler was found. Joseph had been reported missing by his mother a few days prior, and his body was found near a river that was near Pazuzu's house. It was discovered that Joseph had died from a gunshot wound. Now, not much is known about Joseph's background. I really wish that I could tell you more. All I know is that he was legally blind, and his mother has described him as the most kind-hearted person you would ever meet. She was absolutely devastated when she heard the news about her son. The exact location where Joseph's body was found was the exact location that Pazuzu would often go to perform his rituals on animals. And because Pazuzu was pretty well known in the local area, it didn't take the police too long to link the death of Joseph Chandler to him. The shooting of Joseph Chandler was also linked back to another person called Nicholas Ritz. It turns out that Pazuzu and Nicholas were hanging out by the river. Joseph was also there. We don't actually know how they all met, but somehow the three of them had met earlier on in that day. Pazuzu and Nicholas had convinced Joseph to get in their car. Then they drove him to this river. They were apparently all hanging out, and then all of a sudden, Joseph was shot. Now, Nicholas was actually the one that pulled the trigger. However, Pazuzu was the one to get the gun from the car. After they had shot Joseph in cold blood, Pazuzu and Nicholas fled the scene. Pazuzu allowed Nicholas to hide out in his home. However, in the end, they were both tracked down. They were both found at Pazuzu's home, and they were both arrested. After being questioned, Nicholas claimed that the shooting was just an accident, and the police believed him. Nicholas confessed that he was the one that pulled the trigger accidentally, and he pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter. He was sent to prison for 13 months. Not 13 years. 13 months. Pazuzu was charged with being an accessory to involuntary manslaughter. Now, when it came to his trial, the authorities treated Joseph's mother disgustingly. She wanted to be there at the trial. She wanted to be there for one of the people responsible for her son's death. However, the authorities, the police, they were messing her around. They kept telling her, "Oh, you don't need to come to the trial. It's not necessary for you to come." They kept messing her around about when the trial was actually going to be. They were saying, "Oh, sorry. Yeah, the trial's not actually going to start today. There's been a little bit of a mix-up." They were just messing her around so much, and I find that so suspicious. Why didn't they want Joseph's mom at the trial? There are so many suspicious things in this case. In the end, for his involvement in the shooting of Joseph Chandler, Pazuzu was found guilty of being an accessory to involuntary manslaughter, but he was just given probation. Yes, this repeated offender is only given probation for accessory to involuntary manslaughter. Probation for being involved in a homicide seems like a slap in the face to the victim's family. I am honestly curious where you stand on the justice system's handling of this specific charge. They essentially took a murder confession and walked away because she said no to a search. Tell me I am not the only one screaming at the absurdity of that decision. Now, that just doesn't make sense. How many times is Pazuzu just given probation? There is something fishy going on here, and you cannot convince me of anything else. I think it's safe to say that the shooting of Joseph Chandler was not an accident. It was murder. And Joseph's mom also thinks that it's just so suspicious. If it was accidental, why didn't Pazuzu or Nicholas phone it in? If it truly, genuinely was an accident, why didn't they report it? Why did they go on the run? Why did they hide? And also, I am not 100% convinced that it was Nicholas that pulled the trigger. We know how much control Pazuzu has over people. He would quite often convince people to commit crimes for him. I wouldn't be surprised if Pazuzu was the one to pull the trigger himself, or maybe he made Nicholas do it. However, it's gone down as involuntary manslaughter. And I just think that that is absolutely disgusting, the way Joseph's mom was treated. The whole case of Joseph Chandler has been handled so poorly, so disrespectfully, and there has been no justice in his case. So we now get to 2011. Cynthia has been putting up with her son's nonsense for years, and she had had enough. She wanted to put an end to all of this. She had been basically living inside her locked room for years, letting Pazuzu do whatever he wanted. Well, now, that was about to change. Because in November of 2011, 2 whole years since Josh and Tommy first disappeared, Cynthia went to the police and told them that she had witnessed a murder with her own eyes. And the murder was committed by her own son, Pazuzu, along with one of his wives, Amber Birch. When she told the police this, they were like, "Well, okay, we can't just take your word for it. We need your permission to search your home, because at the end of the day, it is Cynthia's home." And unbelievably, Cynthia said no. She said the police could not search her home. And I'm like, what on earth? What was the point in you going to the police in the first place? Well, Cynthia was apparently scared of Pazuzu. She was apparently scared that if she let someone come and search the home, he would get angry. And I think she knows what he's capable of. So she refused the police's request. And unbelievably, the police just went, okay then. They just accepted this. They didn't press her any further. They didn't go out and get a search warrant themselves. Again, I find this so suspicious. There have been multiple reports that there are bodies in the backyard of this home. The homeowner has now gone to the police to report that her son committed a murder in front of her. It kind of seems like someone may have known what Pazuzu was up to and was trying to cover for him, but I'm not pointing any fingers. And 3 more years pass. It's unbelievable. Pazuzu carries on being a complete menace, bragging to everyone that he is a murderer, that he has gotten away with so many terrible acts, that he's a serial killer, and I just don't understand how so many people were scared of him. It seems like the police were scared of him, the neighborhood was scared of him, his own mother was scared of him, and every single person that entered his home was scared of him. So when is all of this going to end? Well, thankfully, it is now all about to end, because there was one person that didn't seem to be scared of Pazuzu. So it is now October 2014. News about Pazuzu ending people's lives and burying them in his backyard had reached one of his old friends, a man called Matt Flowers. Now, Matt and Pazuzu were really close friends a very long time ago, before Pazuzu went really off the rails. However, as Pazuzu started going off the rails, he was dragging Matt down with him. And Matt was like, nope, I need to get out of this situation. I cannot let Pazuzu ruin my life. So he joined the US Army and served in Iraq. It was a few years down the line, in 2014, when Matt was home, that he started to hear all of these rumors about his old friend Pazuzu. And Matt was like, no, this cannot continue. Someone needs to do something about this. So Matt went to the police, and because he was a war veteran, the police actually took him seriously. The police finally decide to do their job. And this time, when they went to Pazuzu's House of Horrors at 2749 Nob Hill Drive, they took all of the right equipment. And finally, after 5 years of being missing, and after 4.5 years since the police did that half-hearted search of his backyard, the police finally found the remains of Josh Wetzler and Tommy Welch. It turns out that they had both been in shallow graves this whole time. The fact that they were in such shallow graves, it's like, how did the police not find them the first time? If the police had found the bodies of Josh and Tommy the first time, Pazuzu would have been arrested right there and then. And then Joseph Chandler may not have lost his life. Pazuzu hadn't been subtle at all. The police really dropped the ball on this one. And after 5 years of getting away with murder, Pazuzu Algarad was finally arrested, along with his 2 wives, Amber Birch and Crystal Matlock. After the arrest, the police did a thorough search of the house.
It was February 2010. Deputies had jumped the gun, coming within feet of where Josh Wetzler and Tommy Dean Welch were buried, likely walking right over them. Triad bloodhounds were unable to pick up on the scent in Pazuzu Algarad's backyard. Their first search warrant had failed.
It's not what anyone was hoping for. We had hoped that they were just didn't want to be found for a period of time, but that wasn't the case.
Pazuzu was charged with accessory after the fact to involuntary manslaughter in the death of Joseph Chandler the following October. Chandler had become the 3rd man to disappear from the Clemens area between July of 2009 and July of 2010.
So after a period of time, they back and forth with that. The credibility of that witness diminishes.
Pazuzu's self-proclaimed wife, Amber Birch, assaulted his mother, Cynthia, on September 22, 2011. While Amber was in jail, Cynthia went to the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office.
I believe what her intent was to come down here and put all that on Amber.
Cynthia told deputies that in late 2009, she'd heard a gunshot and saw Amber holding a rifle.
Amber came to the entry of the hall there.
Tommy Dean Welch was slumped over on the couch in their home.
I love her and I forgive her.
But when deputies said they needed to question Pazuzu about the murder,
that's where it stopped. So it was a classic case of a mother protecting her son.
I think that she was more a product of Pazuzu's brainwashing than anything.
When Pazuzu was released the next year following his accessory after the fact to involuntary manslaughter conviction, things calmed.
He would tell me he's never going back to jail again. He's doing much better.
2 more years went by until a couple more leads came in and led deputies to a woman named Dixie Ross in late September 2014.
All the information started coming in there at one time, and so we pieced it together prepared the search warrant, looked at the previous search warrant.
Dixie told deputies Amber texted her to come over to the Nob Hill home in early October 2009. When she got there, Amber told her, smiling, "I just did my first." It would later prove to be Tommy Dean Welch. Dixie, now in fear, helped Amber dig a hole. Looking for an excuse to stop, Dixie said her sandals kept falling off while jumping on the shovel. Amber took her shoes off, gave them to Dixie, and then put on Tommy Dean Welch's before starting to sing, "I'm wearing a dead man's shoes," out loud, over and over. And 4 days later,
He had to use self-contained breathing apparatus.
deputies got their second search warrant for Pazuzu's home.
This went on for a matter of weeks.
After arresting Pazuzu and Amber and days of digging, collecting every shred of evidence they could, the scene was released, with deputies only going back to guard it out of fear people would go there on Halloween.
3 times this property is then sold back to the note holder.
The home was sold back to the bank.
If it ever does sell, who's going to buy a house that people were killed in?
At 8:45 in the morning on Friday, April 24th, 2015,
It just needs to be over.
the walls were torn down. As neighbors erupted in cheers, a track hoe flattened the home piece by piece. Dust, debris gathered for years floated off into the blue spring sky.
We'll probably never know what all took place in that house.
In the meantime, Pazuzu had attempted to commit suicide in the Forsyth County Detention Center. Transferred to Central Prison in Raleigh for safekeeping, where he continued to write his mother letters.
And he said, "Mom, I just can't take it anymore."
Until October 26th, 2015, when he wrote the very last one.
"Please, I want to be cremated."
Sheriff's office says Pazuzu was transferred.
And this case broke in the media. Video footage of the house was released, and the public saw the inside of Pazuzu's home, and everyone was just horrified. This house was so disgusting. There was trash everywhere, things broken everywhere, blood smeared over the walls, spray paint, graffiti, satanic imagery, and when it broke in the media, we all know what the media is like. When anything involves Satan or Satanists, they run with it. A lot of people were blaming the devil for all of this, and I'm like, no, blame Pazuzu. He is the one responsible for this. And also, Amber and Crystal, they were named the wives of Satan. During this media frenzy, the police were trying to figure out how Josh and Tommy even ended up at this house. They were trying to gather as much evidence as they could. They were talking to as many people as they could. However, Pazuzu and his wives were not saying much. From testimony of other people that were at the home and evidence they found, the police put together what they think happened. In the summer of 2009, Pazuzu had a falling out with Josh, which resulted in Pazuzu shooting Josh a total number of 7 times in the head and in the torso. He then dragged Josh's body down to the basement, where his remains were handled in a disturbing manner. Then he buried the remains in the backyard with the help of his 2 wives, Amber and Crystal. How Josh and Pazuzu even knew each other and what they had fallen out over, no one really knows. Then in October of 2009, after another disagreement between Tommy and Pazuzu, it was determined that Tommy was shot in the back of the head when he was sat on Pazuzu's couch. However, this time, it wasn't Pazuzu that had fired the shot. It was actually his wife, Amber. After Tommy's life was taken, Pazuzu and Amber buried his body in the backyard. Again, we just don't know how Tommy and Pazuzu knew each other. Tommy didn't do drugs. He wasn't in that world. How did he go from spending the day with his family, going home for a few hours, and then all of a sudden end up at Pazuzu's home? These are questions that I don't think we will ever get the answers to. And remember when we talked about Pazuzu wearing that bandana soaked in a dark substance in that homemade adult film? Well, that bandana belonged to Josh, and Pazuzu had started wearing it after he had ended his life. So now the police had kind of figured out what had happened. Pazuzu and Amber were both charged with murder, and Crystal was charged as an accessory. All 3 were held in jail while awaiting trial. However, Pazuzu never actually went to trial because on the 28th of October, 2015, he was found dead in his cell. He was found unresponsive with a deep wound in his arm, and it was determined that he had lost a fatal amount of blood from this wound. Now, Pazuzu was on suicide watch, so he was supposed to be monitored 24/7. He was not allowed any sharp objects. So it's like, well, how was he able to take his own life then? Well, it is thought, not confirmed, but it is thought that Pazuzu actually was biting into his own arm with his sharp teeth, and he had created such a big wound that he ended up bleeding to death. However, I do just want to stress that that has not been confirmed. An autopsy couldn't determine the exact cause of death, so it's not known. Did he actually bite into his own arm? Did somebody else participate? Maybe handed him something? There are actually rumors that staff in the prison allowed him, maybe even helped him take his own life, but those are just rumors. He took the easy way out, leaving the families without the answers they desperately deserved. I wonder if you feel this was a form of justice, or did he cheat them out of their day in court? So obviously, Pazuzu could no longer stand trial. And the worst thing about all of this is that he is the only one that has answers to so many questions. And now, those questions will forever go unanswered. But now we need to turn our attention to his wives, Amber and Crystal. Well, they never actually went to trial either. In March of 2017, Amber Birch pleaded guilty to second-degree murder of Tommy Welch, as well as pleading guilty to being an accessory to the murder of Joshua Wetzler, and she was sentenced to a minimum of 30 years in prison. Crystal Matlock also pleaded guilty to being an accessory to the murder of Joshua Wetzler, and she was sentenced to a minimum of 3 years. As for Pazuzu's mom, Cynthia, she was basically locked in her room for years. She witnessed a murder. She allowed her son to do whatever he wanted. Well, after this case, Cynthia has refused to talk. No one even knows anything about her. In the aftermath of this case, authorities entered Pazuzu's home wearing hazmat suits because the home was so disgusting and dangerous to the health of the people searching it. There was trash everywhere, inside and outside. There was human waste everywhere, urine in the carpets, blood all over the walls. There were also animal carcasses everywhere in that house. There were deceased animals in cages. It's honestly disgusting. The house was deemed unfit for anyone to live in, and it was demolished. That brings us to the end of this case. However, I still have so many questions. There are so many suspicious things in today's case. I have so many questions for the police of the local area. Why did they refuse to believe people reporting the murders, reporting the disappearances? Why did Pazuzu keep getting lenient sentences? He was found guilty of being an accessory to involuntary manslaughter. Who gets probation for that, especially when they are a repeated offender? Why was everyone in the neighborhood so scared of him that no one reported him? Why did the police refuse to get a search warrant when Cynthia went to them and reported a murder that she had seen with her own eyes? Why did the police go to Pazuzu's home in the first place without the proper equipment? How is it that they didn't find the bodies of Josh and Tommy the first time around? And why was Pazuzu allowed to take his own life in jail? There is something fishy going on with this case. And there are also rumors that Pazuzu was a serial killer. However, if we just go by the reported facts, well, he is not a serial killer because he technically only took the life of Joshua Wetzler with his own hands. However, he bragged about other murders. He had apparently ended the lives of homeless people and 2 sex workers. And who's to say that he wasn't the one that ended Tommy Welch's life, that he wasn't the one that pulled the trigger on Joseph Chandler? But what is just so heartbreaking is that there are so many unanswered questions for the families of the victims. Joshua Wetzler was described as a kind and caring man who worked hard throughout his whole life. He was absolutely adored by his young son, Jared. He had so much to look forward to in his future. He was taken far, far too young. He was only 32 years old. Tommy Welch was described as an amazing person. He was incredibly close with his family. He loved hanging out with his brothers and his young nephews and nieces. His favorite thing to do was spend time with them. And he as well was taken far, far too soon. He was only in his 30s. And then finally, Joseph Chandler was described as the most kind-hearted man you would ever meet. He would do anything to help anyone, and he is hugely missed by his mother. He was also taken far, far too soon. He was only 30 years old. My heart goes out to every single family member and friend of the victims of today's case. This case is a disturbing look at how someone could openly commit such terrible acts, and yet the system failed to stop him for years. There are just so many unanswered questions about how he got away with it for so long. Let us know what you think about this case in the comments below.